We left off on Sunday with verse 16, and we read, "And the ark of the Lord came into the city of David. Michal, the daughter of Saul, looked out of the window and saw King David leaping and dancing before the Lord, and she despised him in her heart." When the ark got back to the city, the worship party would have been at its absolute max. There would have been singing, and we clearly see David dancing. This would have been the party, a worship party in response to what God has done. And it was huge. Everybody would have been on the streets. But Michal is not out on the streets celebrating. She's up in a window looking down. And we read that she despises David in her heart. And it's really easy to jump on her response and criticize her response. And some of that criticism is founded. But before we criticize her response, I think we should find some compassion for Michal. We don't consider her situation very often, but if you rewind the clock 20 years, her situation is sad. It starts off 20 years ago with Michal, a princess. She's a princess in her dad, King Saul's court, and she has a massive crush on David, which is understandable. David is a handsome, strong young man, a rising star in in Saul's court, and Michal has a crush on him. And it gets sad right away because her dad, Saul, is going to give Merab, Michal's older sister, to David as his wife, which is sad if you have a massive crush on someone for your older sister to get to marry him. But before they get married, Saul calls off the wedding as a way to get back at David. And when King Saul finds out that Michal has a crush on David, King Saul decides to arrange a marriage between David and Michal, but not because of love. Saul actually hopes that Michal is going to be a snare or a trap for David. So Michal's dad is using her as a pawn to get at David, his rival. That's so sad. That hurts my heart. So they get married. Which if you have a massive crush on someone, what a windfall of event to get married to that person. So then now they're married, even if it's for a bad reason. But their marriage doesn't last long because Saul tries to kill David. And in order to save her husband, Michal cooks up this plan to deceive Saul and help David escape. Saul is so angry, hates David, that Saul actually gives Michal to somebody else as a way to get back at David. So her dad now gives Michal to someone else to be married, Paltiel. While she's married to Paltiel, almost her whole family dies in battle. This is a tragic life story for Michal. While she's married to Paltiel, almost her whole family dies in battle. And then when David finally becomes king, he sends for Michal. We have no record of him coming before that. But now that it's politically convenient, David sends for Michal. And her cousin, Abner, rips her away from her husband Paltiel. And what a sad situation to have your family basically betray you. Her brother, Ishbosheth, is king in that area. And I think I said that Abner was her cousin. Abner was her uncle. And to have your uncle rip you away from your husband, to have your brother, who's king in the area, condone the whole situation, send you back to David, your first husband, who when you get back to David, you aren't his only wife. You're one of many. What a sad situation for Michal. And so here she is looking out the window, despising David in her heart. And when I step outside the text for just a moment, it doesn't say this explicitly, but I think given her circumstances, I think Michal is responding more to David than she is to his worship. Because she's going to accuse David of some pretty silly things. Like she's accusing him of being inappropriately dressed, like not wearing enough clothes, and of scandalous dancing, which we don't have any other record of David dancing scandalously. And if we look at a parallel account in 1 Chronicles 25, 1 Chronicles 15, we see that David wasn't dressed inappropriately. He was actually dressed like one of the Levitical priests when they wouldn't have been dressed inappropriately. So I don't really know where Michal is getting that he was dressed inappropriately if he was actually dressed more like a priest. We have no record of him being inappropriate with dance. So what's she accusing him of? I think she's actually responding more to David the person than to his worship. And I think that's important because she's letting her circumstances give her permission to respond poorly. She hates David. I think she hates David. I'll say I think because the Bible doesn't say that, but I think she hates him because of what he did to her. And she lets her circumstances drive a poor response. She's not a good model. She's not a good model for responding well. If we want a good model, we can look at Abigail. Abigail was married to Nabal, and Nabal is described as being harsh and badly behaved. He was probably not a good husband if he was harsh and badly behaved. But how does Abigail respond? She responds with grace and courage. She even spares Nabal's life when David was going to kill him. Abigail is a great example of not letting your circumstances drive your response. So I think we should look at someone like Abigail and say, oh, she responded well despite her circumstances. And Michal, her circumstances are terrible. They're so sad, but she's responding poorly. And I think we need to call it what it is. She's letting her circumstances give her permission to respond poorly. So if we look at our own lives, we should turn the spotlight on us and ask ourselves some questions. Like, you should examine your self-talk. Do you say some of these things? Do you say things like, yeah, I know that wasn't right, but I had to because fill in the blank. Like, I know it wasn't the right way to respond, but they always fill in the blank. Well, if they wouldn't treat me like that, I wouldn't have to fill in the blank. Well, it isn't fair, so I had to fill in the blank. Those are all statements about giving yourself permission. But if we look at Abigail, we look at Michal, we see very clearly our circumstances don't give us permission to respond poorly.